Hi, I'm Carol Gold.
I'm Steve Clark.
And Steve, let's talk about Dallas and what happened here in Texas yesterday. We almost can't not talk about it.
Right.
It's everywhere. And I guess I want to start with, you and I were talking before we started filming today, and you said a couple things to me, and then you said, but we can't talk about this stuff. We can't talk about it the way we're talking about it now off video, and the reason is political correctness just doesn't allow this stuff to be said anymore.
Correct.
So let's talk about that, but also let's talk about it in terms of that. Let's keep it within the context of Dallas if we can.
Yeah.
So tell me what your thoughts are around not being able to say certain things because of political correctness.
I'll give you the story that we talked about earlier. In the 1960s, homosexuality was classified as a mental disorder. And I forget which branch, it was either psychologist or psychiatrist. I think you know which
It's
branch.
psychiatry.
Psychiatry basically had deemed it as a disorder. And there was a massive protest at one of their conventions that they wanted it declassified as not a mental disorder, as just an alternative
Lifestyle.
An alternative lifestyle, another form of living. And by doing so, they were able, by having a protest, they were able to make a decision, not based on facts, but based on what the crowd wanted. So now going forward, like I said, I believe a psychiatrist, if somebody comes in and says, I'm homosexual and I would like to stop that behavior and have a new behavior, a psychiatrist by law is not allowed to treat that person because it's not a disorder. So that's the point, is that there's so many things that if you protest enough, you can change the discourse, the things you can say and you can't say anymore. So now, by any stretch, you can't say homosexuality is a disorder.
You also can't say white lives matter.
Right.
You have to say black lives matter.
Right.
You can't say that you're against the belief that there is such a thing as global warming, because now they're talking about criminalizing having the opinion that global warming is a farce, that global warming doesn't exist, at least not man-made global warming,
Right,
as a significant cause of global warming. So my concern, we're very focused on the Second Amendment. A lot of people, after Orlando, after Ferguson, after things that have happened recently, there are a lot of people very concerned about the Second Amendment. I'm much more concerned about the First Amendment. And the reason, not that I'm more, I guess I'm equally, but I see an undermining of the First Amendment, which is deadly because it's the First Amendment for a reason. The guys who made the amendments knew what they were doing in terms of priority. And they made freedoms of speech right up front because it's the underpinning of a free society. And it's the opposite of what they had come from in Britain. So my concern here is that these groups that are advocating violence, be they radical black groups like the Black Panthers or any of Farrakhan's, what is his organization?
The Nation
of Islam, or the actual Islamists, the Muslim terrorists that our president won't identify, whatever extreme group it is, and some of them are less visible than others. For example, George Soros and the Open Society funds Black Lives Matter. So there are not just visible extremists. There are the kingmakers, so to speak, of these extremist movements.
Funding these groups.
Funding them, exactly. That the threat of violence is being perpetrated for multiple reasons, and one of them obviously is to create chaos and create dissension and bring it to a level where the country is fundamentally militarized and it makes it easier to take over the population without trying to sound too conspiratorial or paranoid here.
Right.
The other reason, though, is by way of shutting down speech. Violence shuts down speech.
Yes.
People become afraid to speak the truth. And you and I were talking right before today's show. I think that's actually what's happened. I think people are becoming afraid to speak the truth, whatever it's about. And it's the appeal again of Donald Trump. I have to qualify. He's not my candidate.
Right.
She's not my candidate. I don't have a candidate. I don't have a horse in this race. But one of the appeal of him, of course, is that he doesn't care about political correctness.
Right.
And that's the other end of the pendulum swing, right? Is that too much of
control of speech.
Too much, and then no control of speech,
Right.
where you say anything you want and it can be as absurd and ridiculous as possible, but it's refreshing because we've been shut down so much. So I think our liberties actually are very much at stake right now, whether it's the Second Amendment or it's the First Amendment, or look, it's the search and seizure, whether it's the NSA and Homeland Security and whoever else infringing on our privacy rights. I think there are several basic fundamental liberties that are being challenged and threatened now, and it's of grave concern to me. So, okay, let's go back to Dallas. So what's happened there? Well, the violence is shutting down the police, actually. That's an even more disturbing, effect of what happened in Dallas. I've heard this morning that I know of at least one policeman who's walking away, giving it up. He said he's not going home in a body bag to his wife and child. We have police in Atlanta. They can't get cops in Atlanta. They're considering ex-felons now as rookies for the police force in Atlanta. You're a Marine. How do we respond? How do you think we should respond to violence?
I don't have unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that. I mean, the way that I look at it is that you have to be a good steward over your own life, and the reality is that by doing so, you don't get involved in these conflicts, and that's really my take on it. But touching on your point is the fact that, like you said before, about the police not really because they're so monitored, the police is not really going to probably be as effective now policing the people anymore. And so I was reading this morning some of the statistics out of Chicago that the crime rate has gone up exponentially. And it makes sense to me because the police feel that every time they go into one of these communities that they're being filmed, that they're being watched. And so hence what happens, they disengage. And so unfortunately more crimes get committed. So the response that you're asking me is like, how do you deal with the violence? I think it's the way that the police are going to do it. They're just going to disengage from the populace. They're going to remove themselves because A, they don't want to get shot, and B, they don't want to end up in jail either.
So then it makes it more incumbent upon us to be our own first responders.
That's right.
And then that brings us back to the issue of an armed population or not. Because if not, then who is going to defend you or your property if something happens, if the police aren't going to show up, or they're going to take their good old time showing up because they only want to arrive after it's over now.
Of
Otherwise,
course.
they're targets. They're deliberately,
targets.
They're targets. Because I wrote a post this week about what can we do as individuals. I'm not sure we can do anything on the national scale as individuals. I do really believe that in our own lives we can do certain things that will make a difference, but they're incremental differences, and it's going to have to happen one person at a time. I mean, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to try to reach out when we encounter people who are different than us every day, and we all do. And we have ethnicity here in Texas, a diverse population. I think we have to go out of our way to try to find common ground with other people now, because we're being divided deliberately from the top. We're being, top down, bottom up is that philosophy of revolution. We're being divided deliberately. We're being divided economically. We're being divided sociologically. We're being divided religiously. We're being divided in every way, rich and poor for sure. And I think the only way we overcome institutional division is by taking it upon ourselves as individuals to try to build bridges and mend bridges everywhere we go.
Unfortunately, I disagree with you there. I think what's happened before is that the culture was homogeneous, right? There was when people came here, from the 1950s, 60s earlier, there was a common language. People, they would, for example, I grew up in New York, and it's very common that you would have a little Italy, a little Chinatown. You would have communities of immigrants, but the larger goal was to integrate into the society as whole. So over time, they would integrate into society. So those communities eventually dissolved. But right now, we don't have that anymore. People like to be distinct. They like to be separate. So you have, you have people that come here that are not integrating into the society anymore. So your point to reach across the aisle, I think, is a noble one. But from our political institutions, our cultural institutions, we no longer do that. We champion diversity. We champion many other things, but we never champion American rights, integration, culture, language, and borders. We don't.
I totally get your point. What I would say to that is, if we were invaded by aliens tomorrow, literally, if they showed up with the spaceship in Washington, D.C., and we were all scared of them, we'd be united really fast because
Yeah.
we would understand that we have a common external force. What we have to wake up to realize is we've been divided deliberately. You know, before Obama, we had almost a race on a nation that didn't see race. We had an entire generation right before Obama took office that when polled, they didn't see race as an issue. Now, since Obama's president, we're more racially
Of
divided than
course.
we've ever been. So we've been deliberately divided. I think what we have to wake up to is that we're being deliberately manipulated and that we have a common enemy, no matter how diverse we are as ethnic groups.
Right.
And if we could focus on that we're actually being manipulated through diversity, we have a chance of building united we stand, divided we fall.
Right.
I think we're out of time.
Yes, we are.
Thanks for joining us. We continue to try to have we'll continue to try to have these conversations that help you get through what we're going through, which is what we're doing as well. I'm Carol Gold.
I'm Steve Clark.
Thanks for
watching.
listening.